The whole world is zooming in on the third round of the Inter-Korean Summit, which is held in Pyongyang, North Korea. Professor Andrei Lankov is a specialist on North Korea who met with former U.S. President Barack Obama to discuss policies on North Korea back in 2013. Last year, he was chosen as the Theorist of the Year by the American news publication Forign Policy. We sit down with Professor Andrei Lankov to learn more about the key topics and prospects of the September 2018 Inter-Korean Summit on Heart to Heart. All the eyes of the world are on Korea due to the third round of the Inter-Korean Summit. And joining us today is Russian scholar and specialist in Korean studies, Professor Andrei Lankov. Hello, and thank you so much for joining us today. Would you like to say hello to our viewers?
Yes, definitely. I would like to say hello. And I also would like to express my gratitude for having me here. I'm 55 years old, and of this time I have spent 33 years doing largely or exclusively North Korea. And it has been an interesting job, and it will be interesting too in decades to come.
Well, thank you once again for joining us today. Now, the third Inter-Korean Summit is to be held in Pyongyang this time around. And I would like to ask you, do you think there is a significance to the fact that it is being held in Pyongyang this time?
Well, the problem is that theoretically inter-Korean summits should be held first in Pyongyang, then in Seoul, and then again in Pyongyang, and so on. But it's not really acceptable for the North Korean side. Because, first of all, they care about security a bit, but what is more important, they don't want their public to see too much of TV footage of Seoul. So they want it to be in Pyongyang. And there is an added advantage because in the Confucian culture, it's a person who is socially inferior goes to the residence or office of a person who is socially superior. So by having in Pyongyang, the North Korean government sending message to its own population that Kim Jong-un is superior to this somewhat suspicious puppet regime in Seoul. And this is how they describe South Korean government no matter what in the official documents. Therefore, it's good for North Koreans to have it in Pyongyang, and South Koreans don't see any reasons to worry because this kind of small symbolic games are not that important for the South Korean side.
I see. Now, there are positive evaluations on the Moon Jae-in government as it has brought the North to the table of discussions. Is there something you would like to add about this?
Well, I don't think it was South Korean government which brought North Korea to the discussion table. I think it was Donald Trump with all his bellicose threat, and also Xi Jinping with his decision to support the US-initiated economic pressure. So there was no way for the North Koreans but start negotiating. Nonetheless, having said that, I'm pretty much impressed by the diplomacy of Seoul. Because basically they are playing quite good games, having few, if any, cards. Actual ability to influence the situation is small, but they are trying to be a very efficient, and they are actually a very efficient go-between. Again, they cannot influence the strategy, but they can basically cut corners, can reduce chances of minor or mid-range misunderstanding and clashes, and this is good. And they are doing quite well.
남과 북은 9월 18일부터 20일까지 평양에서 2박 3일간 남북정상회담을 개최하기로 합의하였습니다. 현재 남북 간에 진행 중인 군사적 긴장 완화를 위한 대화를 계속 진전시켜 나가고 남북정상회담 계기에 상호 신뢰 구축과 무력 충돌 방지에 관한 구체적 방안에 합의하기로 하였습니다.
So now, along with the venue, the timing of this summit is what a lot of people are paying attention to as well. Now, the second round of the Inter-Korean Summit was held in May of this year, and the third in just 3 months' time. So what do you think is the reason behind holding another summit so soon?
Diplomacy. Problem is that it's vital for both North and especially South Korea to create an impression of some progress in dealing with the North Korean nuclear issue.
I see.
Actually, there is little, if any, progress, but there is always a threat that President Trump of the United States, if he decides that nothing is happening, will eventually go back to the fire and fury mode, 2017. When we obviously came very close to a major military confrontation, which would probably cost a lot of lives.
Yes.
Neither North nor South Korea wants it. And they want to create an impression that things are good, creating an environment where it will be difficult for the US president or American diplomacy suddenly switch back to the kind of maximum pressure bellicose mood. So nothing much is going to happen. There are some serious obstacles. First of all, North Korea has no intention to surrender nuclear weapons because they see it as a necessary, the only means to guarantee security of the regime and existence of North Korean state, but also UN Security Council and UN Security Council resolutions make difficult any kind of economic cooperation. Nonetheless, both sides are working very hard to create the right environment, which indeed creates some chances for minor advancement, maybe not, definitely not denuclearization, but some useful compromise is still possible.
Yes.
So it's a good diplomacy. Sometimes they say about something which is not actually happening. Well, but it's diplomacy after all. Personally, have I been working for the South Korean government, I would be doing exactly the same thing. It's smart. It's smart.
There are several agendas for the summit, and denuclearization happens to be one of them. Denuclearization talks between North Korea and U.S. Has come to, I guess, an apparent standstill. And Korea's role at the moment happens to be very, very valuable. So what kind of position should the South Korean government take for denuclearization to take place, and why?
Denuclearization is not going to take place, no matter what, period. No matter what, North Korean government will never, ever surrender all nuclear weapons which are in its possession, even though it's quite possible that under the right conditions, North Koreans will agree to significantly reduce their ICBM and nuclear arms potential. So right now, I believe the major goal of the South Korean diplomacy is to reduce chances of a new confrontation. In the ideal world, there is some probability that Moon Jae-in and South Korean diplomats, and by the way, President Moon has shown himself to be a remarkably successful diplomat, will persuade North Korea and United States to make some mutual concessions, like, say, United States signing the declaration of the end of hostilities and maybe relaxing sanctions in the voting for relaxed sanctions in the UN Security Council. Such position will be supported by China and Russia, definitely. And in exchange, North Koreans probably surrendering some of the fissile material, some of the nuclear weapons and equipment. They're not going to surrender everything, but they can surrender some, and basically it should be seen as a really big breakthrough. Yes. This should be a kind of maximum goal of the South Korean diplomacy, and the realistic immediate goal is, as I have said a number of times, to prevent situations from sliding back to the highly dangerous confrontational mood of 2017. We don't want to read tweets by President Trump about fire and fury, let alone about a tweet about his order to attack North Korean military and maybe political targets.
Yes. Now, inter-Korean relations have improved since the first inter-Korean summit.
Yeah.
But sanctions on the North have halted progress on economic cooperation. So what aspect of that will be discussed at the summit?
As I have said, the Pyongyang summit is largely about mood and environment. And broad smiles and hints that everything is okay, even if it's not okay. So there will be a great deal of expectations and promises in the next few days and weeks. But, as you have mentioned, the UN Security Council resolutions, especially the resolutions which were adopted in 2016 and 2017, make any kind of meaningful economic cooperation with North Korea impossible. Therefore, all these talks are just, well, talks. It's vital to persuade, above all, the United States to change its attitude to the sanctions and support not complete, basically sanctions are not going to be cancelled, impossible, but partial relaxation. Rolling sanctions back to the level of, say, early 2016, before sectoral sanctions dealing with coal, with mineral resources, with seafood were first introduced. If it happens, cooperation becomes possible.
Right. Now, President Moon Jae-in visited Russia in June of this year in hopes of improving economic ties between North Korea and South Korea and Russia. So I'd like to ask you about your thoughts on this as well.
The first obstacle is, of course, UN Security Council. Russia is very skeptical about the sanctions, but it will not break it. Russian businesses will wait until the sanctions are at least partially relaxed. And it might be a very long wait, frankly, given the current mood in Washington. But even if sanctions are released, let's not have exaggerated expectations. A lot of people are talking about railway link and gas pipeline.
Yes.
Well, it might happen, but don't count, please, on Russian side making significant investment. Because for the Russian state railway company and for the Russian gas company, it would mean investment, large investment. For railway, we are talking probably actually $10 billion US, for maybe a bit more. For gas pipeline, somewhat less, but still a lot. For the Russian side, it means making large investment in a dangerous and unpredictable area.
I see.
They would immediately become hostages to the domestic policy of South Korea, North Korea, and United States, maybe to some extent of China. Investing the same amount of money in many other areas, they would definitely get good profits. What will happen here is not clear. So if the South Korean side is that much interested, the money should come from the pockets of the South Korean taxpayers. Are South Korean taxpayers enthusiastic about spending $10, $20, $25 billion on North Korea? Frankly, I'm very, very skeptical, especially given the current situation in the South Korean economy. However, if they cannot resist the temptation and just want to spend $20 billion, definitely Russian side will make some small additional payment at most and provide technological and political support. But don't expect Russian taxpayers to pay for it.
I see. I'd like to talk about military tension as well. Now, in the Panmunjom Declaration of the Korean Peninsula, the leaders of South and North Korea, they agreed on the alleviation of military tension as well as war risk. To give a few examples, soldiers or border guards and weapons at the post guards or the guard posts were, I guess, partially withdrawn, not 100%, but they're partially withdrawn. And the loudspeaker broadcasts were terminated. So do you think the talks will ease military tension?
Yes, it will. We have to distinguish between two problems. A situation when a war erupts because it's a political decision of any side, and a situation when it erupts because of bad luck. And when you have a lot of young males with big guns positioned against one another, it's risky.
Yes.
So if you can reduce the chances of kind of incident leading to a war or most likely just kind of dangerous provocation, confrontation, wonderful. At the same time, talking about larger politics, well, I would remind you that the First World War fought from 1914 to 1918, the bloodiest war ever to that point, was officially described as a war to end all wars. And 10 years later, in the 1920s, late 20s, all major powers signed Kellogg Pact. Kellogg Pact said that from now on, nobody was going to fight anybody. We are not going to have any war in future. Just 10 years later, the worst war in the human history, with 50 million people dead, with the use of nuclear weapons, began. It's about price of all these declarations. If any side has a political will to start a war, all these small things are not going to make the slightest difference. But it's still a good idea because sometimes, maybe not wars, but military conflicts begin just because of miscalculations, loss of control, everything. So it's a good idea. Just let's not overestimate it, overrate it.
I see. Now, recently there was the inter-Korean family reunion that was held. There is much anticipation on the talks of holding more of these inter-Korean family reunions. So do you think that we will be able to see more of these inter-Korean family reunions taking place, I guess, say, for example, on a regular basis or even through online reunions?
Well, I think it's quite possible because both sides now wants to create a kind of sweet impression. Everything is nice, it's sugar and spice. And these reunions will work perfectly well.
Yes.
Basically, there is one problem for the South Korean government, because South Korea is a democracy. They face some pressure from the public to have these family reunions, because people are sympathetic about divided families. In North Korea, they don't face such a pressure because they are not a democracy. Therefore, for North Korean side, family reunions is a way to extract some additional concessions from the South Korean government. South Korean government, in order to avoid domestic pressure, agrees to the reunion, and North Koreans will demand some kind of money, aid, whichever. But I believe that, first of all, it's not going to happen right now, because right now both sides need family reunions. And second, even when it happens, it will happen eventually, the North Koreans are not going to demand much. I think that just from the purely humanitarian point of view, it's good. And If we can use Skype, it's good because it will be easier, cheaper. We'll have less political problems because North Koreans care about political problems. For the North Korean security police, it will be easier to monitor all talks. Why not?
I see. Now, what may be some other things we should pay attention to, in your opinion?
Well, my major hope is that there will be some movement in the UN Security Council about sanctions, because as long as the current level of sanctions is maintained, all highly desirable economic interaction, economic exchanges between North and South Korea are not going to start. No matter what people are talking about during the summit. So I hope that there will be some development. And it's possible, it's my hope that if the United States makes some kind of concessions on the sanctions issue, North Koreans will probably reciprocate by some kind of reduction in their nuclear and missile program, which will be quite good. Frankly, judging by the mood I have seen in Washington above all, I'm a bit skeptical. But let's hope, let's hope. And maybe this declaration of the end of hostilities will also be helpful, again as a gesture by the Americans and creating some conditions when North Koreans will feel like, well, reciprocating. So it's I would say this kind of minor concessions from the United States would be most welcome. But once again, let's not expect miracle. And and if we just get some arms reduction, it will be good. But my personal hope is much humbler. I just hope that we will somehow survive without any major military confrontation until the end of President Donald Trump's term.
Yes.
남북과 북미 간의 뿌리 깊은 불신이 거칠 때 서로 간의 합의가 진정성 있게 이행될 수 있습니다. 남북 간의 더 깊은 신뢰관계를 구축하겠습니다. 북미 간의 비핵화 대화를 촉진하는 주도적인 노력도 함께해 나가겠습니다.
And we're down to our last question. Where do you see South and North Korean relations going in the future?
In the short run, because both sides want at least to create an impression that things are good, we are going to have this, sugar and spice period for a long time. Then it will depend on who is going to be in power in Seoul. As long as the progressives, the local modest kind of left-leaning nationalists are in power, probably they will be willing to provide North Korea with some kind of aid, sometimes just aid, sometimes aid disguised as trade. And North Koreans are going to like it because they are making money. And if it happens, well, so relations will be reasonably good. If these conservatives are back in power sooner or later, I would expect some kind of crisis. We have seen it under President Lee Myung-bak and President Park Geun-hye administration. So it depends who will win the next elections, I would say. But until the next elections, I hope that we are going to have a reasonably stable period.
Yes.
But again, let's not fool ourselves. The South Korean side will have to pay for this stability. Not much. I think it's acceptable price, but they will have to pay.
I see. I would like to thank you so much for your
Yes,
time,
thank
for
you.
joining us today. We are shooting our program actually before the third
Yes.
Inter-Korean summit. So yes, I guess we'll just have to wait and see to find out the results.
Yes, I expect a lot of spectacular decisions,
Yes.
but not much of substance, because once again, UN security sanctions resolutions basically block any chances for meaningful advancement, and it's quite sad.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your
Yes,
time once
thank
again.
you.
I had a wonderful time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.